episode of Unscripted is a bit different. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with three multifamily LinkedIn influencers. The first was Mike Wolber, the Chief of Sales Officer at Apartment List. Next up was Devin Wirt, the CEO of Connexus, and finally, Mr. 20 for 20 himself, Dom Beveridge. We get into it in the episode, but this entire conversation started as a result of a LinkedIn post by Devin on how to develop a personal social media strategy on LinkedIn. The conversation we started having in the comment section was so good that we knew we needed to have it in real life and record it and share it with all of you. Now, as the title of the episode implies, we get into what our approaches are, how we think about thought leadership as a concept, and discuss if LinkedIn is taking the place of the role that conferences traditionally held in regards to thought leadership, which may have been a bit dangerous considering we recorded while we were all attending the NMHC OPTECH conference. Now, we had a blast recording it, and I hope you get as much out of the conversation as I think we all did. But before we get there, a quick reminder that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of LeaseLock. The content is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice or endorsements. Now, while we'll strive to ensure that the content is as accurate and up-to-date as possible, LeaseLock makes no representations or warranties of any kind, expressed or implied, regarding the accuracy, completeness, or reliability of the information discussed. The content is provided as is, and LeaseLock assumes no responsibility for any errors or omissions. Listeners should consult with qualified professionals before making any decisions based on the content of this podcast. This podcast may include references to third-party sources, which are provided for convenience and informational purposes only. LeaseLock does not endorse or take responsibility for the accuracy or reliability of any third-party content. In no event shall LeaseLock, its affiliates, or any of its employees, officers, or agents be liable for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, or consequential damages arising out of or in conjunction with the use or the reliance of the content of this podcast. Now, with the highly scripted disclaimer out of the way, let's get unscripted.
All right, guys, I appreciate you sitting down here with me on this, but not to give the audience like too much credit on this, why don't we go around before we dive into this whole LinkedIn and thought leadership and what to post on social, etc. Why don't we go around and just kind of give quick introductions of who we all are? And Mike, I'll start with you across the way.
Sure. My name is Mike Wolber. Really excited to be at the table with you guys. Been in the space for about 10 years and currently working over at Apartment List as Chief Sales Officer.
Nice. Devin Wirt, one of the co-founders and CEO of Connexus Living, but excited to be at the table with everybody and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Dom Beveridge, also excited to be here. Principal with 20 for 20.
And I'm Andrew Bowen. I'm SVP with LeaseLock, and I'm not going to say how long I've been in the industry because it's a lot longer than that. But let's start by talking about how we actually got here to the table. So it's OPTECH, 2024, we're here. But Devin, you're kind of responsible for starting this whole thing off by asking a question.
I've gotten in worse trouble in my life, but yeah, no.
Okay, so talk to us really. What was the question? Why'd you pose it to begin with?
Yeah, so every day I get asked, like, how do you come up with your content? How do you know what to post? I can never think about it. I advise other companies outside of what I do at Connexus, and CEOs always ask me, like, what are you posting about? What is it? And for me, I see Mike posting all the time. I see Tony Souza posting all the time, is that I know what I like to post about. There's three core things. It's about people, it's about revenue, and it's about the company, right? So there are three things that I personally focus on within my content. But I want to actually open up to the crowd. And Mike, you post quite a bit. Like, what is it that you post about? How do you come up with your own content? Are there certain core things?
Yeah. And I mean, I think to go back to Andrew's question, like you prompted this question, like, why do you come to LinkedIn and what do you post about? And I think everyone's answer is probably going to be quite different. I definitely selected thought leadership. There were 4 answers: marketing and sales, recruiting and job hunting, online learning, and then the winner by a mile was thought leadership, where more than 50% said that's what they're here for.
Yeah, it was interesting because that was a poll that I put out there, and it was funny because your post started off just a firestorm of all of us who would like to think of ourselves a little bit of influencers, quote unquote. Going down the rabbit hole of what do we think it is? Thought leadership. I know towards the end we want to get into what is thought leadership and the way we kind of think of it, differently. But it was interesting, that poll that you mentioned there, yes, thought leadership by far and away was the number one at over 50% on what we posted was, what's the best use of LinkedIn? The following week, we also asked the question, how do you most often use it? And I was shocked that the results actually exactly mirrored Now, granted, it could be different cohorts, etc. But one of the questions I would ask all of you of, when you look at your feed, the way your feed is curated, and you see how people use it. And Dom, I'll start with you because I'm hoping for that answer from you.
Okay. So we're leading the witness now.
It is, sure is.
So I guess my answer to that original question was that pretty much everything I post on LinkedIn is promoting something that's usually off the platform.
Right.
So the thing is, so to answer, I think when I answered Devin's question, I can't really look to what's successful on LinkedIn to guide what I post. Okay. It's much more like it's sort of my job to figure out what I think people are interested in reading about, most of which takes the form of articles, papers, whatever, like off the site, and then to figure out to kind of negotiate with the LinkedIn algorithm to see. Yeah, because LinkedIn obviously doesn't want you to take people off the site, right? But that's the main sort of objective for me. So I can't really be guided by the algorithm, but I'm trying to find the best fit between what I have to give the algorithm to get my stuff noticed, so it feels to me much more like a negotiation. But the short answer to the question is, what drives what content I post is what I happen to be developing content about externally.
Okay. I guess to go back to the question is, like, if I scroll through my feed, it's about leadership, but not maybe thought leadership. I see a lot of people posting about their teams, the celebrations, the get-togethers. I see that a lot from the property management side, but also from the vendor side, right?
Oh, very much.
I see a lot of it around, there's only a few where I see it's more thought leadership. People may get on there and spend more time in the thought leadership. My personal feed is just around leadership in general and around promoting people.
Yeah, that's interesting because one of the things that I noticed, at least in my feed, I would have thought that the way people are using it the most is much more geared towards promotion, recruitment, and sales. Because those are what I see. And I think, and this, I'd be interested to hear everyone's opinion, like a lot of what you just described is, company leadership that's in play. Maybe I'm jaded. I kind of look at that as a recruitment play too. That's where I would put it in that recruitment bucket. So.
Agreed. I would say people are, look, we're all here for people. We all have values. We look for certain things in leadership, whether it's growth, whether it's going to be happiness in the workplace. But no, I agree that it's about people and really recruitment to what we're going to do.
So Mike, when you recently put something out on LinkedIn, that was a number that candidly to me was absolutely embarrassing. Like I went and looked at my own stat and went, oh, good Lord, I'm not even in the same game. And it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2 million, right?
Yep.
So 2 million impressions in the last 365 days.
Yep.
So when you're rephrase the question, how do you think about your posts on, engagement versus delivering value? Because they can, both are valuable, but like when you're thinking about posting, is it something you're strategically trying to do? Is it part of a calendar? How do you approach it?
So a couple questions in there, and I'll start with maybe one of them. No, it's good. One of the things I've learned is that the first 2 years I started posting on 2020 is when I actually started intentionally creating content. I cared a ton about delivering value because I wanted to connect with you three, leaders in the industry, regardless of partner or the operator side of the industry. I also wanted to be able to help my business, which again was thinking recruits and those kinds of people, but it was maximal value. And I used engagement as my signal, getting likes, comments, DMs, things that are being said in the boardroom. And what I've realized over time is that now it's a war on LinkedIn because engagement is easy to play. Right now, you post a selfie, you say something hoorah, you celebrate the team, it pops, but you don't hear much chatter about that. Right. So now it's it's ultimately trying to find threading that needle for me now, where you see about 50% of the content is truly my ideas, my perspectives on leading sales teams, or my perspectives on how procurement in this industry is so broken and buying and selling technology. But there's still a fair amount of engagement because one of the things I'd love to talk to you guys about today is who do you think you're talking to on LinkedIn?
Oh, great question.
For me, one of the top 3 people I try to speak to often is my team. I see it as a very impactful way to praise my team in public. So I do a decent amount of engagement content, but it drives great results in the business. So I'm very much probably 50% engagement, 50% value creation today.
Interesting. I'd love, let's go around and talk about who are you actually talking to, Dom?
So I'm sort of trying to reach the same audience that mostly reads my stuff. So I think LinkedIn is probably about 20% of my audience, like a give or take, depending on what the content is. And I do it with the probably slightly naive assumption that the same people overall are the same segment that's interacting with my stuff on LinkedIn. I can tell it really varies depending on what you happen to be posting about. I mean, one thing that I've really come to notice over the last year, something that's quite counterintuitive, is that engagement and impressions are not that correlated. Like you normally think that you normally think that like the more engagement you get, the more impressions it's going to get. It just doesn't work that way at all. Like there's stuff that gets, and even things like video views, right? So you'll find that you get video views that way overshoot the impression counts that you would normally get. You'll find that you'll get huge. I mean, there's certain topics that you can write about right now that you can tell people are super interested in and not necessarily willing to engage with. And so but yeah, when you watch the behavior going all over the place, it's
I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, how about you?
I guess I'm trying to engage with people who want thought leadership, right? And almost even question the status quo. And I'm taking a page out of Moshe Crane's book, but I actually want to ask questions to people like, what is challenging? And I usually will tag thought leaders in the space like Mike and everybody here saying like, please give your feedback. But I actually want to talk about more challenging issues and things that probably don't want to be talked about, whether it's conferences and the engagement and even the poll that would happen, right? Mm-hmm. Right here at OPTECH in 2024, 60% of the audience are vendors.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'd rather talk about that because when every company here is spending at a minimum $10,000 to be here, and a lot of us a lot more. It's what is the ROI? How do we quantify that? And I think that it's a little taboo to talk about it, but I actually more want to like question the status quo and engage thought leaders around a lot of my content.
Yeah, so I mean, mine, I actually really thought about that question until you just asked it, I can be perfectly honest. But I think most of the time when I'm writing things that I would consider thought leadership pieces, I'm typically trying to write to an asset manager. Like I'm trying to write to an asset manager of, in my world, multifamily or single family housing. And I very much take it from that perspective. But to your point, I will often find that material becomes highly engaging because it's a super specific audience that wants it, but the impressions are terrible. You know, I mean, the highest post I've had with impressions was me announcing I was leaving my last company. Like, I mean, it went through the roof. But I mean, it does bring, and to Moshe's point, I actually put a post on this and he called me out on it, rightfully so, was I asked the question to LinkedIn, are you looking to drive engagement? Or are you looking to drive, to deliver value? And he's like, well, is that the only two things you could possibly do? And I was like, nope, you're absolutely right. There are a whole bunch of other things you could potentially be doing with that. So.
Well, they say the riches are in the niches, right? And I think you think about that, like if you can get down to like that super narrow audience, I think that is where it gets really good. And I haven't done that yet. Like I think I really try to talk to people leaders in the industry. Like I think there's a little bit of nuance there, but people leaders, I try to talk to like future recruits. I definitely use it as a recruiting platform. That's what I selected on Devin's poll. And then I would say aside from that, I really try to talk to like my company or like cohorts in my companies, because I think in the vendor space, there's such a lack of mind share that's intentional. There's just so much like marketing content. They're like really like trying to like get in there and actually share about like how it's really going and like building a growth stage business. My litmus test is now if it can speak to one of those three people, that's how I decide to post. And I post frequently because of that.
So remind us again, those three people.
So I'm talking to people leaders in multifamily. Yep. I'm talking to future recruits, whether it's sales or marketing. And then I'm talking to my company specifically, but I think I look at like kind of the vendor kind of cohort as being an audience that I can really speak to and give kind of ideas and thought process to.
But let's dive, I mean, like the vendor cohorts there. I mean, one of my business partners, Joe Summers, says this all the time, is like the vendor relationship is just as important as the operator to vendor relationship. I mean, whether it's bouncing something off of Mike or even asking for an introduction or anybody here, that relationship's just as important. I mean, would you not agree?
I agree for sure.
I will actually come out on the table and say that for a long period of my career, I didn't agree with that. And I'll use two companies we were with, in the past, which was some of the most contentious, battles back and forth as far as competitor products. And I worked for a behemoth in the industry where I could live in an insulation. I didn't need that. Since I've left that environment and come out of here with no knock to them whatsoever, I value it much more than previously, because I was in a spot where I didn't have to and I didn't see it. So I think that a lot of the industry is probably in a situation similar to me, especially if you're on the operation side and you're in the ownership side. They're not thinking about that necessarily. I didn't for a moment when I was on operations side. So I'm really, really glad that you called that out.
Yeah, I think it's just how we're interacting with each other. How do we help each other? Because it's not even just around the network. We all struggle with things, whether you're 0 to 1 million or whether you're going to go from 10 to 100 million in revenue. We all struggle with different things that we can help each other out with. And we're leaning on each other's competencies. And that's what builds a team, whether it's internal to your own org or external. We're all trying to build that team that we can leverage each other's competencies.
Mm-hmm. So back to your original question on LinkedIn, because we still haven't gotten to what our approaches are. And maybe could take a stab. We've talked about who you're talking to. What is your inspiration? What is your thought process on what you should be coming up with from a social media? How do you decide what it is that week, that day? Do you actually calendar it out? Like, what's the approach?
I would say I'm probably less thoughtful than maybe like Mike. You probably post 4 or 5 times a week.
More than that, probably like 5 to 8.
5 to 8, right? I'm probably less thoughtful. It's a conversation that I'm having. It's a team meeting I'm having. It's a dinner I'm having at home. It's something there that I'm just like, this will click, right? And then I just write the content. I do wake up every morning. I get in a workout, and around 6:30 to 7, I think around content that I want to post. I spend 30 minutes a day really thinking about that, but it's usually around some sort of conversation I had previously.
Okay, so you're almost a combination of scheduled and opportunistic.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mike, I would imagine you're scheduled. Or you're
partially.
Really prolific if you're not.
I'm partially scheduled. I probably schedule about 1/3 of my content.
Okay.
And then I've gotten really comfortable with like stream of conscious. Like when you asked earlier, like value versus engagement. I think early, you guys have probably all been here time and time again. You write the post, you delete the post, you write the post, you delete the post, you get fatigued.
I've never
and then
done
by
that
the end, the
whatsoever.
post sucks because it's just like it lost all of the heart. Mm-hmm. I've learned that like if you ship faster, you usually do better because you shipped it when you were thinking about it or when it was top of mind. So I do have a photo album on my phone that's called LinkedIn, and it's screenshots of like quotes or other LinkedIn posts. That's like my prompt when I get dry for ideas. But I find that man alive, it'll be 10 p.m. Kids are in bed, and I just will batch out like a week's worth of content, and then it goes a full week where I'm dry. And I'm going to the archives and finding reasons, or I'm in a meeting and someone says a quote and bam, that's my post. So it's very much a mix of scheduled, but I've learned that the LinkedIn platform specifically really rewards consistency. Yes. So no matter what, I'm posting at least 5 days a week, and it just become part of like who I am, and it's really helped me build in a really consistent fashion.
How about you, Dom?
So I'm usually probably about 3-ish times a week. It's always what I post on LinkedIn is always downstream of whatever I'm working on. So that always sets the topic. My process is I always do on Saturday morning when I'm watching the game. When I'm watching the soccer, I always on my other screen, I'm just like looking at last week's LinkedIn stats and like setting up posts into the future. I have the same sort of perspective on the analysis part of it, where I just want to capture just enough information so I feel like I know what's going on, and then you just stop doing stuff that looks like it's not working. That's basically my my process for this.
I'm more in your camp in the fact that I have the best of intentions of having a great schedule, and like on Monday it's going to be about motivation, on Tuesday it's going to be about this. I can't tell you how many LinkedIn posts and half-baked analysis I have in a drafts folder right now, where I sit down to start half of it, but then you actually have to. In my mind, it needs to be a full analysis. You need to have the data to back it up, and you need to have the chart and the graph and all those types of things, which there's a whole argument as to whether that's even valuable out there or not. So yeah, I'm more in your camp. I have the goal of being much more scheduled and disciplined about it, but it's really opportunistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody posts about different things and what speaks to them. I guess I go back to the initial component of it. For me, it's about 3 things. Like I love sales and revenue, so that's always 1 post a week. It's about team and like people and something around that nature. And lastly, it's just promoting the company. I think that we should all be promoting our companies. I think that as brand leaders or whatever you want to call us, influencers, we should be promoting the company that we're with at that time. So,
well, and something that's really crossover between the two of you is you have very clear, this is what's going to bring value to my organization. Like if I heard you correctly, that's kind of what I heard is like, these are the three pillars that will bring value to my organization. And that's what I want to actually deliver. And same with you, actually. You know, that truly is the same thing. It's to bring value to your organization by building engagement on your content. So it's an interesting crossover and commonality.
So it's funny, on the drive here, Mike and I were talking about it. I was saying like there are influencers and people who do it a lot, but it does drive value to the company. I mean, take a look at Tony Sousa. I know, we asked Tony to be here today and he couldn't make it, but that's a lot of his job is to drive the brand awareness of RPM. And it's a great example of it.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I know he's taken a little bit of grief from different people over different times who, when they give grief for what he's posting, most of the time I go, do you understand his objective? You know, that is something that he comes into it with a very, very clear objective. So again, what people miss about that is he's very intentional about what he is trying to accomplish with that. And that is RPM awareness.
Yes.
And he and Jay Parsons were my inspiration for thinking about engagement versus delivering value. And you talk about that, you know, Jay's posts, I've had a little bit of insight working with him for so many years. You know, you look at the comment section on his post are just as valuable as the post itself, often more so because you're getting the mindset of how people are thinking about it. Do I expect that type of engagement on a Tony Sousa post? No, but again, it has a completely different goal for it, which actually brings me to one of the questions that we threw out there is, okay, would you consider what Tony's doing? And really, again, the strategy of RPM to build the RPM brand and him as a recruiting magnet.
Yep.
Is that something you would consider thought leadership? When we bring it back to the whole thing, is that a thought leadership or is that a different use for the tool?
I think it depends on what he's doing. I think it's a little bit of both. I think Tony does have thought leadership in what he's posting about, but I think it is a recruitment strategy. I mean, I think it depends on what he's doing. And then I also would love to dive in. I mean, Lisa Trojan just posted around like, what should we not post about on LinkedIn? What is offensive? Or like what? The fact is, if Mike wants to post about his kids and Tony wants to post about his kids, there's nothing wrong with that. People buy in and work for people at the same point in time, right? And I think that's part of it.
And I do think if you look at someone like Tony, someone like the four of us, like, to me, thought leadership is like a really broad word. I asked a bunch of people on an airplane today, like, what is thought leadership? And I got anything from like people that share their opinions online. Okay. Like their own opinions, all the way down to like people that have been published. And it was very much just like specific, like not thinking LinkedIn, thinking much bigger, like the Wall Street Journal. My thought is if you're someone who can show up online consistently and share your own perspectives of how to do something specific, whether it's how to hire or how to fire or how to promote a business or how to show up online, I still do look at that as thought leadership. It's when people are megaphones for their businesses exclusively and don't have the ability to be a filter that you kind of get into the gray zone. But
so I want to understand, did you walk up and down the airplane aisles asking people this?
There's Chatty Cathy in the...
No, I'm shocked about that.
Yeah, I probably talked to like 8 or 9 people this morning.
You know, I mean, when I sit down to try and do a quote unquote thought leadership piece, I typically am asking 2 questions. It's so what and what if. Yeah. And that can be asked about the future of an organization, you know, the direction of an industry. I know this is something, Dom, that you kind of wanted to talk about too. And I really like the, you know, in your mind, is all thought leadership like that really thought leadership, or is there an element of groupthink that you tend to comes in, or maybe riding on people's coattails?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a Rorschach test, right? What you think the other person means when they say thought leadership. Personally, I think it has to entail some form of insight, right? So there's tons of content that's about business out there, particularly on LinkedIn, that, you know, is basically a repetition of something that was in a press release or something that was, you know, that somebody read on somebody else's LinkedIn or something like that. It has the form of thought leadership, but you know, that's a pretty broad definition. I think, you know, thought leadership is about really the promotion of ideas that sort of move the industry forward. That's generally the tone that you want. So I feel like implicit in that, you've got to form some kind of insight. You've got to know something about non-obvious about the thing for it to get over that hurdle. That would probably be my very verbose definition of it.
Well, I mean, not to puff your feathers too much, you actually do a really good job of asking the questions that I think a lot of people aren't asking yet. and thinking about that next question, and then you go deep and wide. Let's be real.
Yeah, that's true. I do go deep. That's
which is why again for you, I think that, and again, this is a dilemma I've had a couple times where, do you leverage LinkedIn and the engagement it can drive on like a LinkedIn article and those kind of things versus your newsletter, et cetera. And you go deep enough that I don't know a LinkedIn article would even house it.
Yeah, I mean, it's useful for me to introduce stuff. Like, there's sometimes some good discussion that comes out of it. It's usually in the DMs is where the good discussion really happens. Yeah. I tend to find. So yeah, it is useful for stimulating and giving a platform for the conversation about like thought leadership, I think. But everything you post on LinkedIn doesn't qualify as thought leadership. I think that's probably what I would say.
No, absolutely. So one of the other questions we posed on this one, I think we kind of actually already answered this, but I'll throw it out there as well. For someone in the multifamily space, you're an owner, you're an operator. What would you say to someone who came to you in that space and says, well, real thought leadership and the real innovation can't come from outside of, someone in the trenches, and then how would you also kind of talk to the vendors about how important it is to stay close to the trenches and accomplish that? And I'll open up to anybody who wants to jump into that pit of worms.
I think it is a combination. I'll jump in. I mean, when the first thing we did was hire somebody from the operator side to help build out what we're doing over here at Connexus. I mean, we hired a managing director from Greystar to say, what do operators want to see? How does that look once it's automated? I think it's a combination of both. And I think that's why we all have to play in the sandbox with one another and guide each other. I mean, I don't think that it's either just vendors can come up with the future of what we're doing, or just operators have to say, this is what I want to see. I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I definitely think that there's like room for both sides of the equation in our industry to teach each other something. I even think about something as specific as LinkedIn. I could teach a lot of people a lot about how to use LinkedIn to unlock better business growth. Yeah. Regardless of where you sit in the industry. Like it's been the last 10 years of my life. Mm-hmm. But I also look at like ego, and I think ego is really important here. You've got to be able to remove your ego if you're willing to consume thought leadership, because there's a lot of times where it's someone who I might pass judgment on or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden I choose not to engage with their content, even though I could probably learn a lot from it. Mm-hmm. And I think ego holds a lot of us back when it comes to like learning and development. And I think that's a big part of this conversation too.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Not the ego, definitely, but you choose not to engage with someone because of it. How do you guys curate your feeds? Like, is it something you're just looking through? Or are you actively going to different people to investigate what they're actually talking about?
I can't say I search anybody to see what they're talking about. I mean, like the people who post consistently show up at the top of my feed. I don't know if I'm searching Mike's name every morning in my LinkedIn, but yeah.
I'll ask a different question.
Sure.
When someone sends you a connect request and you don't know them, how do you decide if you're going to accept it or decline it?
So for me, the razor is, do I think they're trying to sell me something?
And that's it?
Yeah.
And if it's a no, you just exit?
So if I think,
or if it's a yes,
if it's a yes, I just ignore, and pretty much everyone else, and also high overlap in followers, or that's pretty much it for me.
What about you, Andrew?
So I probably accept 90% of the connection requests that come my way. And the 10% that I don't accept, almost every connection I will look at how many connections do we have in possible, what's the title that's on their thing, what industry are they in, and the 10% I typically don't connect are overseas, no connections, maybe one mutual connection, and the industry that they're coming from or they say they're in has basically no relevance to me whatsoever. Outside of that, I'll accept a connection. I will also then wait the 2 seconds to get the DM that's automatically coming for resales. And that's where
and then disconnect.
Well, no, and that's where almost all of the time I'll also try and respond with appreciate the hustle. There's no relevance here on it. So
I'll second that. I mean, I don't accept a lot of times like overseas that have no connections and all they're doing is just trying to solicit. I don't know about you guys, but I get too many DMs a day around automated sales stuff around that's not even relevant. I actually don't look at my DMs most of the time anymore.
Neither do I. That's a bad habit.
Yeah.
My answer is actually like, do you post? So when I look, like if we have a bunch of mutual connections or something like that, I'll accept it. If you're a sales rep at a company that I might want to hire you from, or if you're a VP of marketing for a current customer, a future customer, like those are no-brainers because you're in my 3, right? The people I talk to. But if you're someone I don't know, your title's interesting. I usually look at their profile, and if they post, I'm usually willing to like accept it. And if they don't post, I usually exit. They can follow me, and then I'll find a reason to connect with them if there's engagement.
That's
and so to me, to answer the question, I think posting and unfollowing is a big part of how I curate my feed by controlling who I accept.
So what's the downside of accepting a request from someone who doesn't post?
For me, it's become like as my following has grown, I get more and more asks for like connection, like referrals, things like that. And I've just found a little bit of a disadvantage if I'm connected with people I don't have a connection with. It's a random person that I accepted from, but they're not in my industry. They don't create content that's interesting to me. I've just found that it's almost like an unnecessary nuisance that I can just get an hour back out of my week. Otherwise, Andrew's asking to introduce me to Lena. I don't know who Lena is. I can't help you. So for me, I've just found that it's helped control like one nag, if you will, in my week.
That's really interesting because when we going back to the polls of 50 whatever percent of it was thought they were using for thought leadership. My feed does not have 54% thought leadership in it. Like it just doesn't. So I either was like, okay, either people are self-delusional in how they think they're actually using it, or they troll. And consumption of thought leadership is using the platform for thought leadership, even though it's not necessarily the creation. My initial thought when you said like, hey, if you don't post anything else, okay, you're a troll, you're consuming it, but I wouldn't necessarily block them out. So it's an interesting approach.
Do you guys unfollow? Like if someone posts stuff that's like annoying to you, do you hit the unfollow button?
Yeah.
It's got to be quite a bit of annoyance. I'm not after one, though.
I can't think of anybody who's I've unfollowed because of a post. I've definitely unfollowed from DMs and those types of things, but from a post, typically not.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get me to do it, but I definitely curate. That's like one way I curate. If it's someone who only reposts company content that's someone I know but don't need to engage with, just to save the space on my page, I'll unfollow them. But I still stay connected to them, so I'm not disconnecting.
Is it not missing out on a possible sales opportunity for the company? I mean, isn't part of it driving brand awareness and them seeing this and saying, you know what, I want to work with Mike? Even though if they're not posting, maybe they'll reach out about inquiring about apartment lists.
They can still see my content, but if they're only resharing their personal company's content and they're a vendor, I just think like I can still get the benefit while also making sure that when I turn on my LinkedIn, I see the stuff I want to engage in. Because that's what I found has been really hard. Like a lot of people do effectively just like write a draft from a press release to reshare it. But the algorithm is constantly promoting new stuff that it's really easy to miss the big news. So I think there's like almost an employee responsibility to do the megaphone reshares. Otherwise, that press release you work so hard for, only 5% of your network gets a chance to see it.
So I've got to share what I think is a pet peeve of mine that's come up lately. So I think resharing suppresses content. Like the data that I've looked at, so first of all, I've never reshared a piece of content and had it not massively underperform everything else I post. And it's weird because LinkedIn looks like it wants you to reshare, like it keeps telling you to do that. I noticed this over a series that I was doing this summer where salespeople do this all the time, right? So you post something that has their company tagged and they'll reshare it. Well, what you see is suddenly those posts just do nothing. They get way lower penetration. So everyone I say now is, if I'm doing something that's promoting some content and there's other people involved in the content, so I'm going to tag you, interact with it. Please don't reshare because both of our content is going to dog if you do that. But yeah, it's particularly people with big sales forces. You'll find like all these reshare things come up, like all these people reshare your content, and the content performs really, really poorly.
That's really interesting because I actually experienced the opposite in at least one. With anything I reshared performed poorly, yes. Like if I'm resharing something else, that reshare didn't do very well. But I haven't done the same analysis you have, but just anecdotally I'm looking at it. Stuff that had been reshared multiple times. Take a step back. Things that have been shared multiple times by people from multiple different organizations. Those did perform. The ones that were shared just by my organization, by that sales team, I did see the same down throttle that you're talking about.
So I think and again, over the last year, I guess I've got a little bit more of an appreciation of what the algorithm does, just because I've been looking just at enough data that I get a sense for the patterns in it. And the change in perspective it's given me is I now think of this as there's a few thousand windows out there that are finite in size, And whatever I'm writing, it's about getting this algorithm to put it in those windows. Those windows don't grow the more content that's out there. And so the thing is, I think people, when they see, oh, that's got my company name in it, if I reshare this, that will look great on my profile. Like lots of my clients will see it and blah, blah, blah. And so they think about it from the perspective of everyone's looking at my feed. And the reality is you're trying to get stuff into other people's feeds. And if many people at the same time are trying to get identical content and they have highly overlapping networks, that means the number of people that are going to stop on that thing and look at it, that's going to be lower because there's multiple. If all four of us are trying to post exactly the same thing at the same time, that means you've split the views that you're going to get through our networks. The algorithm is not going to see as much engagement. And the flywheel just doesn't start, basically. Like, I think that's what it looks like is going on to me.
Well, did you guys see the Bozzuto and Venn release this past week?
Yes. Yeah, it was everywhere.
Okay, so that was a really great example where it was not Bozzuto or Venn making a post and then a bunch of reshares. It was a bunch of organic shares from personal accounts.
Yeah.
And I bet you, once Sydney does like the beautiful write-up she'll surely do for all of us, it will be well over 1 million organic impressions. I'm sure the engagement will be something bonkers, and it's because they use the power of a bunch of personal brands. I think resharing helps you, the poster, but in terms of the post itself, I'll tell people, comment on mine, take a screenshot of it, and then post it on organic.
That's a way better. That's a way better way to do it.
And if we're promoting like a pod, for example, we'll win way more views that way. And I think there is a lot of science there.
So that's an interesting segue into what we had as kind of our last conversation piece. You know, we're here at 2024 OPTECH. It's a conference that is designed to obviously drive innovation and bring out the new things. You know, you were part of the Red Sea announcement and working with the paper that you dropped today. My question to the group is, especially when we think about this audience, you just talk about a limited number of windows that are out there. You talked, am I going to reach 5% of my audience? What percentage of the overall multifamily audience is here today? It's actually really small, right?
Very small.
And you said 60% of them are vendors to begin with, vendor
Right.
partners.
That was your, yeah.
So my question is, do you see a world where platforms like LinkedIn take the place of what this used to be?
I think that not in the near future, to be candid. I think that a lot of early stage companies see this as they're going to drive sales. I don't think that enough companies understand the difference between driving brand and a true ROI and how many units they're converting or is it turning into ARR or MRR for their company. I don't see conferences going away just because it's a part of the ecosystem, but I don't personally find them as valuable unless you come extremely prepared, set your meetings in advance. I'm just not a big booth person. I don't see a ton of value unless you're a partner list and you're trying to drive brand awareness there and you're large enough. I think it's really tough when you have a 10 by 10 booth in the back right-hand corner of a conference.
Probably a similar answer, but a little bit different actually. I do think that you could compete with the mindshare or the thought leadership benefit of a conference now if you're at this table and you already have an audience. I look at the energy it would take me to write a speaking submission to maybe get selected at OPTECH, to maybe have 80 to 150 people show up as a very big effort.
It's huge.
I look at the effort it takes for me to go get a dynamite CMO or VP of Ops, someone I sell to and work with every day, to do a bang-up 45-minute interview to understand their story, their unique perspective on planning for FY25, and how easy it is for me to get 1,000 unique listens in the first week on a podcast. So I think there's a world where you can at least challenge it. But I think the way that our industry buys software still revolves around a conference. So there's just like this procurement gap that I think certain companies will start challenging. Like we're not exhibiting at OPTECH this year, as an example. We're here. We're going to be feet on the ground. We're all paying to be here. But I do think there's a world where the smartest companies and the smartest brands will occupy mindshare throughout the entire year, and they'll compound much faster versus waiting until the next conference. And I think that's what the lion's share of people here do, is they do nothing and they conference really hard. But Andrew, let's look at you. You're going to have all this content you can share between cycles, which will be a huge advantage for LeaseLock.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you in this, and I definitely want to hear your take on it too, Don, but I'll go load it. I do think it's not dead in the near future, but I think that the point of the conferences are going to be a little bit different necessarily in the fact that you can get this steady stream of information and innovation and changes. And what used to be reserved for, the big launch at an OPTECH, et cetera. I mean, Vin did it the week before, and again, the publicity-wise, did a fantastic job of pushing it out there. But Dom, I'm curious to hear your take on it. What do you think of the question?
It's funny, I've been talking about this a lot because I published that post last week where we broke down the numbers coming to the show. And most of the reaction was like, there's too many vendors at this conference. And I was saying you're learning the wrong lesson through that, right? Because the thing is this audience keeps growing, right? Every year, this is record audience this year. It keeps growing every year. It's stubbornly always 60-30 vendor to PMC at this conference. So there's no basis for thinking people don't like this, right? So what this tells me, what that analysis tells me is that there is colossal value in there being a dominant vendor showcase in the industry, and that's what this event is about. If people don't like that, then they don't understand what this event is really for.
Right.
So when I think about things like exhibiting, I always view, when I was a CMO, I always used to view your booth at NAA as this cost of doing business, right? You have to have it, and the reason that's the case is people just go and hang out in the trade show. Like, people will walk multiple hours around the trade show. They'll have their meetings in the trade show. Like, what booth you buy? That's how NAA works. When I look at something like OPTECH, I don't think that's what this show is.
Agreed.
So it's about the meetings. I also I kind of question how relevant conferences are to thought leadership as well. I think the thing that client conferences are different. We can talk about that, but conferences like this, commercial conferences, they're more about what are people saying about this thing than they are about how does this thing work. Like, I don't think people go to OPTECH to learn how stuff works, right? I think people go to OPTECH because I want to hear pitches. I want to hear what people are saying about this stuff. I want to hear what some other PMCs are saying about this. It's a very different thing from truly sort of educational stuff.
Well, and to your point earlier, for the write-up, you could put that energy into it. But I know if I did a write-up on exactly how the LeaseLock platform works, we would never be selected.
But it's so cool.
I know, exactly. But because, they don't want to offend, this competitor, this competitor, because they do want 5 different booths, not one booth, et cetera. So I think conferences are kind of hamstrung in that regards to actually be able to have that type of content from stage.
Right, and also like the panel structure in and of itself, it really puts a very low ceiling on what you can learn from something, right? I mean, I think one of the most interesting things, if you listen to people talk about like centralization, for example, you've got this format for panels where there'll be somebody from UDR or Camden or Essex or someone like that on a panel, and some other people. And there's this weird, so you've got one company that's really far down the path of this thing on a panel with 2 or 3 people that aren't. And there's this weird sort of parity about the conversation that just doesn't reflect any of what's interesting.
You literally just described my last year's NAA panel.
But that's it. All of the reason why you need lots of reason conferences are not going anywhere, the reason you need loads and loads of conferences in this industry is because it's just really unusually fragmented and the companies are really different from one another.
Yes.
Right. And so with that in mind, all of the stuff that's interesting in my view in the industry is about understanding the context of individual companies and why they do what they do. And you can't do that well through panels when, we've got to have that company because they're a sponsor, and we've got to have that company because they haven't done a panel for a while. And that's the way you staff panels, right, at these conferences. And you put this very low cap on what you can ever really find out, like, I think, which is one of the reasons why I don't think that's what people are really getting from conferences.
Yeah, so I could do a whole podcast with about centralization by itself and just the downstream implications and the way that specialization is really going to have some implications to like leadership development models in our industry and all kinds of stuff. So I love that. So we've been talking for a little bit. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And I'm going to throw a curveball question for you guys that we didn't do in advance to wrap it up. Mike, I'm going to go to you first and come this way because that's going to give me the most time. That's the most time to think about
strategy.
it.
I do the same thing.
If you had one piece of advice to someone who is trying to up their LinkedIn game, what would it be?
My number one piece of advice would probably be more of a piece of encouragement, which is like progress over perfection. I think the best way to like up your game is to consume good content so you can create good content, but you have to start shipping, because until you start to ship, you don't get engagement. And like Dom was saying, good things happen in the DMs as an example. Your DMs and your signal does not start until you actually start to share your voice. And I think the faster you start to ship, it'll get better that much faster.
By the way, that's what everyone misses about marketing as well. People worry about
perfection kills us.
Perfection, and people think about quality and quantity like they're two conflict, like a dilemma, and in actual fact, they're correlated. Like the more
absolutely,
yeah.
And if someone's struggling with that, great book, Just Ship from Seth Godin is a great word for that. So, Devin,
consistency, one word. You got to get it out there, right? Mike said, ship it out. Just consistency, right? We all have thoughts on it. Write it down. Get it out. Start posting, and do it a certain amount of times a week. Tag people. Tag thought leaders that you want to do. Ask questions, but it's got to be consistent. Don't post once every other week and think you're going to grow a following. You got to be consistent with it. Like anything else, it's practice.
Oh,
I think always ask the question: would I read this?
It's good advice.
It's good advice. Yeah.
Mine is just talk to the void. Like if it doesn't land, it doesn't land. You know, like so. I guess it's kind of just ship. It's going back to when I think about it, but it's like it's if it was meaningful to you, that's all that really actually matters at the end of the day, because it's your voice that you're putting out there, and it's a reflection of you.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so last little bit we go to is like, how can people find you? Where can they get to you? So at the end of this podcast, so we can say, because we know where we're all from. Mike, how do people connect with you?
I'm super hard to find on social media. Mike Wolber on LinkedIn is definitely the easiest. If I can play a role in helping as it comes to marketing, mwolber at apartmentlist.com.
Same. I mean, you can
You're mobile at apartmentlist.com as well.
You can put my name in the search bar, Devin Wirt, and if not, I mean, it's Devin at joinconnexus.com.
So see, LinkedIn for sure. If not, Dom at 20for20.com.
Again, LinkedIn, and just see the show notes. We'll put all these connections in there. Gentlemen, I really, really appreciate the time that we carved out here.
It's great.
We really enjoy it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.